Welcome to the Clarion podcast, the official podcast of the Clarion, DU's school newspaper and the voice of the pioneers. I'm Dustin Amick, and we are entering week 10, Pios. We're almost there. Today we'll be talking about technology in the classroom and how that's affected learning. Next we'll be discussing the pros and cons of studying abroad. After that, we'll continue our discussion from last episode with our thoughts on the new film, Alien Covenant. And an update from this past weekend. DU men's lacrosse beat Notre Dame to proceed to their 5th championship weekend in 7 years. They play Maryland on Saturday, May 27th, with the prospective championship game on Memorial Day, May 29th. All right, we are here with Opinions editor Grace Carson to talk about an article that showed up in the opinion section this past week. It's about technology in the classroom. Grace, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so the article was by contributing writer Chris Lugg, and his opinion was that students should be more diligent in the classroom and not so distracted by technology, by like one of the things that he had said, it's super easy to switch from Canvas to Facebook, and that you should try to resist temptation. One, to give the same respect to your professors that they give to you by being there and trying to give you the information that they have. And then two, just because you paid for this, or your parents paid for this, whoever paid for this, and you should try to get all of your money's worth by paying attention. So yeah, that was the basis of the article.
Yeah, it was an interesting read because there were points where I was relating to it. It's very easy, for me, it's very easy to get lost in the internet during class, especially when the teacher is not giving the most riveting of a lecture.
Yeah.
I find it very easy to somewhat listen in every now and again while also checking CNN or ESPN.
Yeah, and that was something he talked about. He talked about how we as students expect our teachers to not only give us information that is valuable, but also to be performers and entertainers. And he kind of talked about how that's not necessarily their role, and that's not necessarily something we should expect for them. So.
Well, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on technology in the classroom? How do you treat it? How do you approach it?
So personally, I actually don't use computers in the classroom unless I absolutely have to. Okay. If our tests are on the computer, I prefer taking notes. One, because I know myself, and I know that if I have the opportunity to go on Facebook, I will, and then I won't pay attention or I'll miss notes. And also, it's easier for me to remember handwriting things.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the ways that I study, so it gives me a little bit of a head start. But yeah, I definitely know this is an issue. I think it also depends on the person. And also, I don't know. I think it's fine as long as you know yourself and you know how much trouble this is going to get you into. For me, I know that if I did it, I probably wouldn't fail the class, but I know that it's more it's better for me to not have a computer around me and just completely focus. With that being said, I still go on my phone and do Instagram, but that's also easier for me to do than read posts. But anyways, I know some professors actually tell you that you can have laptops out because of this.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think in the end, the responsibility, I don't really know. I kind of don't even really like when professors say oh, this is better for you to do this. At this point, I'm 20 years old, I can decide what is good for me and what isn't good for me. And I know the way that I study. Some people might do better. Some people might type faster on the computer and get notes easier.
That's how I feel.
And I totally acknowledge that. And I think it should be up to the students to make that decision. But when it comes to responsibility of not checking social media, I think that comes down to your self-control. And there's always lockdown browser. I know that's a thing. If you absolutely have no self-control, you can turn that on. And yeah.
Well, Grace, how common do you think it is that students are surfing the internet in classroom compared to paying attention and taking notes?
Yeah, so I don't have any statistics, but I think every class I've been in, somebody next to me has been shopping, or they've been on Facebook or Reddit, or nobody really goes on Tumblr, but some other social media source. I think that is very common. Like, I don't think there's any class I have that where someone in front of me or someone beside me isn't doing something else. So I'd say it's pretty common.
Oh yeah, no, I see it a lot. Spend half my time in the business school, and that's pretty prevalent there. Students are constantly surfing. I actually one time was sitting behind a kid, and he had a porn window open.
Oh, goodness.
In business class. I think he exited out real quick, but I was like, did anyone else see that? And someone else did, so I was not alone. But anyway, surfing the internet is a problem.
Yes, definitely.
But I can't say that it affects me hugely because I definitely surf the web, get good grades, and I selectively listen. What is important.
Yeah, I think like when it all comes down to it, I think I've said this, but it depends on who you are. Like, it depends on how you learn, how you study. If you need like a computer because you are a slow handwriter and you need to type, I think that it could be beneficial. If you are like me and like it's helpful to handwrite things because it helps you remember, or like you just know that you can't be trusted. But honestly, I think it just comes down to the individual, how responsible you are, and how well you know yourself.
Yeah. If anything, I think searching the internet has maybe hindered learning from the professor instead of learning from Google search, because I might have to look something up because I wasn't listening in class.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and that's definitely a fair point. It can also be helpful though. I've been in a few classes where I was struggling or like it was new to me, and I would just like Google concepts while I'm in the class to like try to be more included in the discussion.
Yeah.
So like I said, I think it's like a double-edged sword. Like, sometimes it's good for you, and then sometimes it could be detrimental to your learning or your grades.
Yeah, this is definitely, I mean, it's an opinions piece, and I don't think it's some epidemic, especially on this campus. I think people's grades would reflect that if it were a problem.
Yeah, definitely.
But an interesting piece, and I think it brought a good amount of discussion from it. So
yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Grace, for coming on and talking with us about this.
Yeah, anytime.
All right. So we're now here with entertainment editor Madeline Zann. We're talking about studying abroad and what students get out of it. I want to dive pretty deep into this discussion, but first I want to ask, Maddie, where did you study abroad?
So I studied abroad last fall in Strasbourg, France, which is right on the German border, actually 15 minutes from the nearest German city. And my program was a little bit different. It was pretty intensive French-wise. You had to have at least like 7 or 8 quarters of French experience, or the equivalent of, to even apply through DU.
Okay.
But it was called Internships of Francophone Europe. And so I had a month of classes that were all in French, and it was only like the 7 or 8 other people in my program and I taking classes together. So French politics, history, stuff like that, all in French, minimal homework, but stuff 5 days a week, classes in the morning, and then like usually program activities or like talking to our program director in the afternoon about like culture and how we were doing and stuff like that. And then the last part of it, we had a week off, and then the last 3 months of it was an internship. So I interned at a research group out of the University of Strasbourg. I had a friend who interned at Racing Strasbourg, which is the soccer team in Strasbourg. So we interned with them, which was perfect for him. Someone was at an NGO, a little all over the place. And then at the end we wrote a 30-page research paper in French.
Oof.
And we were also taking 1 class a week throughout that program. Yeah.
All right. And what do you feel that you got out of it?
I mean, for me, I went into it saying I wanted to get some kind of professional experience and I wanted to get my French better. My French was definitely gotten better. Best thing I got out of it was the people, though. I got really lucky with the people in my program, and like I'm best friends still with some of the people in my program. I'm going to England with a girl I met in my program.
That's awesome.
So internship-wise, I was supposed to be at the U.S. consulate in Strasbourg up until a few weeks before I got there, and then weird political things with the U.S. consulate, like really don't know what was going on there, just might not have been doing the intern program this fall, so I ended up there. So like professionally, I don't necessarily feel like I got a lot out of it, but at the same time I can still put on my resume I interned in France and I did translating work and some stuff like that.
Okay.
So, and it was definitely, I mean, it was 5 days a week, so I didn't necessarily travel quite as much as a lot of my friends. Like, it was really more like I was living there.
Yeah. And do you think your abroad experience reflects that of other DU students' experiences in Europe specifically?
I think it reflects more all of the kids who did IFE because they're in Brussels, Paris, and Strasbourg.
Okay.
And there was at least 2 to 3 DU students in each of those programs last fall. And I think we definitely all had more similar experiences in the fact that we were like working and doing all these things. And I definitely had friends who were doing internships abroad, and so they probably had some more, like Euroscholar, stuff like that, probably had some more similar experience than I did, got to know like their region better than traveling all the time.
Yeah.
But I did also have a lot of friends in Europe who were just taking regular classes at a university and were able to arrange their schedule. You know, they had class 3-4 days a week, so they could take long weekends and go travel and really take advantage of that.
Okay. I didn't study abroad, but when I was here in the fall, I saw a lot of Snapchat stories. This is the evidence that I'm working with. And most of what I saw from students that were in Europe was a lot of partying, a lot of clubbing, which was different compared to the people I know who were studying abroad in places like Africa and Asia. So it brings me to the question of what is the value of these experiences and what like the difference is, because some people are actually experiencing culture and really immersing themselves, and others are just partying but in a different country, or at least that's how I see it from afar.
And I do think with Europe there tends to be more partying and clubbing because also that is just the European culture, that clubbing is much more common than I think it is like in Denver. Like, I mean, obviously we have the student bars and stuff like that, but it's a very different style of going out. And I think too, because the European culture, especially in Western Europe, is more similar to the US, so you do feel immediately a lot more comfortable, and it's easier to kind of go find like the bars and everything like that because it's still a little similar to like Chicago or New York or San Francisco or something like that, and you kind of know what to look for. Versus, I mean, somewhere in Asia, somewhere in Africa, you're dealing with a lot stronger culture shock. And also, you might be somewhere more rural, so obviously you're going to have different opportunities and different experiences and things like that. And I think if you really want to probably test yourself culture-wise, Europe is probably not going to do that for you unless you're doing a super, super immersive language program, which has its own set of problems. Though, I mean, I think there's still a benefit if that's not your only reason you want to go abroad.
Yeah.
Because obviously we're going to party whether we're here or we're in Europe or wherever. I do still think there's a benefit as long as you're actually getting something out of it, whether that's a language, maybe just actually want the experience, like living in another country. For me, it was the first time I'd lived anywhere outside of Colorado. So that was a really interesting experience, and it was, especially as an international studies student, I mean, obviously requirement as part of my major, and also be like, yeah, okay, I can live outside the country, and that's something I would actually really love to do in the future. If you're just going to partying, if you really just want to go and party and travel, and you don't care about the classes and stuff, I think it honestly makes more sense to just go this summer after you graduate.
Yeah.
Backpack, party, hang out. Like, it's definitely easier when you are studying abroad because you have a base to come back to. You know, you have either a student apartment, you have a homestay, you have a dorm, whatever, which does make traveling easier when you go, oh God, I can just go home after this. I'm not just like constantly on the move. So I think there's definitely a benefit to traveling and doing a lot of that while you're there, as long as maybe that's not the only, because if that's the only reason you're going, I still think that you might as well just go travel, go do that another time. Though I do also know people who were taking classes, got a lot of cool educational experiences, but then also traveled to like 12 countries.
Nice.
Something like that. So I think it really is what you make of it. And I know some kids are like, did you really get anything out of it? You maybe weren't learning a language and you were just partying, and is that it? But at the same time, if that's what you want your experience to be, then there's definitely ways to make that your experience.
Sure. I had a friend who studied abroad in Rwanda, and he lived with a host family, and he felt like he got a lot out of it. But he was saying that when he came back at like the study abroad debrief with everyone, that the kids who had studied abroad in Europe rarely spoke up about their cultural experiences because they either. He said that they had felt that their experiences weren't as valid because people had assumed that they were partying or not
or you're
getting
in
as
Western
much.
Europe,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
what are you getting out of this?
Mhm.
And I think that's definitely the flip side to that is like I got a lot out of it
Absolutely.
culturally as well. Especially being in Alsace-Lorraine, which historically has gone back and forth between France and Germany like 3-4 different times.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of really interesting history. I mean, I went to a concentration camp that was 30 minutes outside of Strasbourg in France still. So there's some really interesting history and some really cool things. And also being there during the election and in the lead up to the French election, I got a lot of interesting political, cultural commentary as a whole, which was also definitely aided by a couple of my friends' internships. So you do get that. I didn't actually meet a lot of local students because our program wasn't run through a university. So therefore I wasn't like meeting other French students. I had a couple international friends, but we were pretty insular like into our program.
Yeah.
So it was lucky that I actually really liked everyone in my program because 8 other kids, if I hated everyone, it would have just been a totally different experience. So I think there's a lot of still really valid, really important cultural things you can get out of going to Europe. And then obviously, I mean, I didn't go to India, I didn't go to Thailand, so I can't necessarily speak to those experiences. But I also think you could definitely go to Japan or something and get nothing out of it. Just
True.
if you don't immerse yourself in the culture and don't try new things and don't dive into it, and you only talk to American friends and don't do anything outside of your comfort zone. And I think that can happen pretty much no matter where you go.
All right. Well, thank you, Maddie. I appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, we are here with executive editor Ryan Ninesling. He's back to talk about Alien Covenant. He has some thoughts on it. I have some thoughts on it as well. This will be a spoiler review. We're going to get into the movie and our thoughts on the full story and where we think it's going. So, Ryan, how about you open it up with a positive note?
Okay, so I'll do a little bit of a background on it.
Sure.
So, obviously, this is Alien Covenant. This is a direct sequel to 2012's Prometheus, also by the same director, Ridley Scott, who also directed the original Alien in 1979. So this is continuing the prequel series that he has planned out. I think he wants to do like 4 or 5 more after this. He's really...
Yeah, I think there's 4 in total, so 2 more after this, which...
Yeah, he is... And he said
lot.
he's ready to go right now on filming type thing. Like, he's crazy into it now. Well, obviously, Prometheus was a very controversial movie, to say the least. People were pretty divided on it. I think if you took a general consensus, it was very pretty, but the script was just a bunch of psycho babble.
It was nonsense.
Yeah, it was nonsense. And it just didn't feel very much like an Alien film. It felt like Scott was kind of just using the Alien universe to kind of explore some other things he wanted to look at.
Yeah.
And it didn't work super well. This one, I don't think it's great. I think it is an improvement, however, over the first one, Prometheus, for a couple different reasons. One, it is very clear now that Michael Fassbender is the Ripley of this generation in terms of being not like a hero, but being the focus.
Okay, yeah.
He's definitely setting that up. And to me, it works really well because Fassbender's character is one of the best, I think, in the franchise that we've seen yet. You know, kind of up there with Ripley and Ash from the first movie and Newt and Bishop from the second movie, that kind of thing. So he's up there and he does a really great job. He kind of chews up the scenery.
In a double role.
In this one, he's in a double role.
Which he was very good acting opposite himself.
Yes, he's Walter and he's David from the original film.
Both androids.
Yes, and he does a really great job. He feels very distinct.
Very
he does a very good job of separating the two. The reason this one works more for me is I think Prometheus, while I didn't hate it as much as most people I think did, I definitely don't think it was very good. However, I thought it had some strengths. And you see a lot of those here, like the visual elements are still very good in this movie. Kind of playing around with I liked the new creature designs, the neomorphs. I thought they were pretty creepy and weird, and they were kind of a fresh.
I think they were interestingly designed, but they were just all CGI, and they were very
in the second that was
glossy.
One issue that I did have is like
very glossy, very fake looking.
The first like 20 minutes of when the aliens come in, it's all suits, like that you can tell, other than like the chest burster scene, it is little suits because they have like behind the scenes footage of it as well. It's people in weird little creature suits running around. However, you're right, after
they do finish,
as soon as they get into the creepy castle thing or whatever that David's living in, it's all CGI from there on out, which I did have a problem. I thought it worked in some scenes it really was painfully obvious.
It took away the grit and grime of the practical alien effects from the original movies. These just looked really fake. They had too much of a shine to them, and it just really looked like a visual effects monster attacking a person rather than a real practical thing.
And I agree with you in some aspect. I think where it really bothered me was in the last like kind of climactic battle scene where it's a regular alien at this point, like just a xenomorph, and it's hunting Catherine Waterston, Danny McBride's characters in this kind of cargo bay. And in the original films, you never would have seen it until, and they like show it walking around, and like it just doesn't work. Because the original Alien was very much like Jaws. Like it wasn't until the crucial moments where you saw, the whole movie you're wondering about it, type thing. And even in the final scene where Ripley kind of shoots it out the airlock, type thing. Other than when she shoots it out the airlock, it's really dark and hard to see. And so I thought that was a little irritating. But the thing that works for me for this film, and you may agree or disagree,
please
I'm sure disagree, is I liked how it's clear to me in this movie that Scott wanted to address a lot of the criticism around the first one. I think he took it into heed somewhat, and he was trying to kind of address it in some ways, because I think he knew there was people that did like the first one, but there was plenty of people who didn't. So to try and address the philosophy type aspects of Prometheus and then apply them here but make it work a little better, he really turned it into this very gothic Victorian horror film, which I really like. Think about it. You got David living on this planet. They find him. He's got long hair. He's like going crazy. He's this like weird mad scientist guy. He's leading them around this creepy fortress castle thing with like a lantern. And he's experimenting on different aliens, and he's doing all this different stuff. And the thing that really works there is the whole him and Walter dynamic, where he's trying to like prove to Walter like you're more than a robot type thing. And to me it just works because it kind of grounds the philosophy babbling a little bit in this kind of old gothic. There's Byron references and Shelley references. He reads Ozymandias at one point as he's looking out, and it just feels very much like Frankenstein or like Dracula, like that kind of old. In the review I wrote, I talked about how it feels very much like a Hammer film, like those 50s black and white, very corny English acting type, which are classic films in their own right. this is not a classic film, but I felt it took that, and that was a way to, one, it did two things. One, it took it back to the horror roots, because Prometheus was not a horror film. I mean, it had some gory, gross moments, but it wasn't really a horror film. This one is still not as, it's not as contained, it's not as patient as Alien or even Aliens was.
Yeah.
But it's still, I mean, it's very, like, haunted house in space, Friday the 13th in space type film. And so he kind of addressed both criticisms, I think, as best he could with, okay, I'll ground the philosophical stuff, I don't want to ditch it, so I'll make it this gothic, kind of how, like, you know, Dracula has all this philosophy in it and that kind of thing. And then two, just make it a horror film. It's, obviously it has its faults in that. One thing I really talked about in the review is that outside of, I'd say, Catherine Watterson's character, who's basically Ripley Jr., Danny McBride's character, Billy Crudup, and Michael Fassbender, there's like 10 or 15 more characters in this that you don't...
Yeah.
They're dumb as nails, and they're getting killed, and you forget they were even in it before they're, like, getting ripped to shreds.
Yeah.
Like, there's the biggest thing that people are taking issue with, that I also took, is there is a completely pointless sex scene in this movie.
Yeah.
Which, again, is trying to capture that, not so much the gothic horror thing, but more the 80s, like, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street type horror, but it's so thrown in.
Yeah.
And that was where you're like, okay, what is he trying to do here? Like, this is a little messy.
Yeah, characters only existed in this movie to die, and that's not a good reason to have a character in a movie. And so, it reverted back to very, I would say, bad versions of Friday the 13th,
right,
where you don't care about these characters and they're there just to get torn apart by aliens, which, and the deaths were super gory.
Yeah,
I mentioned last week how I wanted it gross. It was definitely gross.
This is definitely the grossest one yet,
but
I think.
At the same time, all of that gore had nothing. Like,
it was
substance,
a little
really,
too
because
much. I wanted it to be more visceral than Prometheus was.
Yeah.
But not to the point of where it was just over the top. Which, certain scenes like the shower scene, which, I mean, you see in the trailer, you can assume what happens there. That scene and some of the other scenes, I did like the kind of little subversions he did on the chest bursers. There was like one, it was like the back, and then the other guy comes out, it's like his face, or like his throat, which was super gross. And I thought it worked pretty well for that. And then I liked that, like, by the second half of the movie, the xenomorphs are back, so it's just the regular. Yeah,
it was just picking it off, and it wasn't, like, terribly too creative, and it wasn't suspenseful. You knew it was coming.
Yeah.
So it, as a horror movie, it didn't do a great job, because they're like, oh, this character's gonna die now, and he's probably gonna jump out right about now.
Yeah.
And so the pacing of those scenes were off. I think the philosophical stuff between David and Walter were really good. I wanted more of that. But they also just sort of lazily wrote out certain things that they had set up from Prometheus, specifically like the engineers.
Yeah, they just kind of like
they
wiped out that whole civilization.
This whole engineer questions, and why are they there? What are they doing? What is their purpose? And then they just write it out of the movie.
Yeah, I feel like...
Which was, for me, really lazy writing, and it frustrated me, because I was like, you're just giving up on that part of the movie because you want to get to the alien part.
See, this is the thing. This is the weird thing that's coming up with me, is I don't know if Ridley Scott wants these to be alien movies. I feel like I
think he does. He started with Prometheus, and then then he immediately jumped to calling the sequel to that Alien. And
I mean, he does, and he's like kind of trapped in that now, because obviously he's like...
I think he was a little impatient, and then he failed himself with... It was like it was a good Prometheus movie, but it was a bad Alien movie.
Yeah.
A good Prometheus sequel and a bad Alien sequel.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the whole eliminating the engineers pretty early type thing was more... To me, you had there was two big philosophical questions in Prometheus, which was one, who made us, where do we come from? And then two was, what does it mean to create something?
Yeah.
And here he was like, okay, Prometheus, the where do we come from thing didn't work. But the what does it mean to create something did.
Yeah.
So that's totally why David is the focus here, of him becoming this pseudo god type thing, which works for me in some ways and doesn't in other ways. I like the direction they're taking because it's going to give Fassbender just endless amounts of material to just play around with.
Sure.
And I really like the character. I like the direction of the ending for this.
I think...
I don't know how it's going to work.
Sure, I think the whatever happens in the next movie will be interesting how it plays out, but also the twist ending is so stupid because it was an obvious twist.
But yeah, and it was kind of irritating because it was like, oh, you're pretty sure of what's going on in the ending, but then in like the alien battle scene at the end, they're like trying to make you think it's not. But
I mean, if they wanted to make you think it's not, they would have showed Walter finish off David. But since they cut away from that scene, it's an obvious. You know it's David then, because that edit out, that quick cut, gives it away. Yeah, it gives it away, and then the thing that was annoying about it was that, so we have to sit through and wait for David to reveal himself and till the end. Yeah, which makes no sense because why wouldn't he just let? Yeah, him helping them defeat the alien thing was them trying to be like, is it actually a twist? That was and just them trying to set up the twist rather than David being logical. So that was, again, for me, just lazy writing. Yeah, if they had done it in a different way where it was just, you know, fake Walter running out of the temple type thing, or didn't show him because he like reaches for a knife, or something like that, and they just did it. I mean, just edited out 5 seconds of material type thing. Yeah, that whole weird. It was a little distracting. That's lame. Because in the end, I was more like, okay, this is alien. You show us convert him, David convert Walter, or you don't give us that twist, because I was just waiting for the twist to happen because... Yeah, it was a little distracting. Yeah. In the end, I don't want to be thinking about that. I want to be focusing on this alien stuff going on. So it was, it was again, a little messy. Right. Yeah, this movie, it was very up and down for me. The first hour is interesting in the world building. Yeah. However, it does drag. Yeah, it is a bit of a slog. Overall, I'm not really excited for the next one because Prometheus for me was disappointing, and this one was just like a step in the wrong direction of what you could have improved on with Prometheus, because I feel like Ridley Scott got impatient and was like, all right, let's just get to the aliens. I think that's what the people want, are the aliens. Instead of, I'll sneak in what I'm interested in the creationism discussion, but I'll give the people the aliens what they want. And I didn't know that I didn't want them until until the end. Like, actually, you ruined it for me. I mean, I'm more on the disagreement side. I thought this was a step in the right direction. I was not a fan. I'm glad that you liked it because... I liked it. People should go to the movies to enjoy it, so I'm glad that you did. Don't go for... I think maybe still leave your brain at the door. Yeah. This is one of those movies. But I still enjoyed it. It probably will not be one of my favorites of the summer. No. I think it'll be in the lower tier, but... No, I thought it had its merits, and it was at least one of the better horror... kind of blockbuster horror offerings that we've had. I mean, I think indie horror right now is peak film right now. I think that's the most interesting stuff going on. Most original stuff is happening in that genre. But in terms of big budget blockbuster horror, we're just getting slosh. Yeah. So this was a good move in that direction. It was a fun popcorn, definitely, horror movie. All right. Well, Ryan, I appreciate your thoughts, and I enjoyed the discussion. So.
Oh, yeah, of course.
That's it for this week. A new edition of the Clarion will be on newsstands Wednesday, May 24th. I'd like to thank Grace Carson, Ryan Ninesling, and Madeline Zann for joining. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week for our final episode of the spring quarter.